Hi everybody, this is Kim C, and you're listening to the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. I teach university fiction by day, and by night I'm in the reading jungle, macheteing my way through King's writing to get to the heart of all that literary magic. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're under Debbie's blue umbrella to explore 2014's hard-boiled crime thriller that is Mr. Mercedes. Mr. Mercedes is book one of a three-book Bill Hodges trilogy that marks Stephen King's foray into the genre of crime and thriller. Although some of his previous titles could perhaps be arguably placed in the thriller genre, this one cemented it. And this particular title fell into my lap because regarding the Stephen King book club I lead, 2024's theme is The Road to Holly Gibney, and Mr. Mercedes is, of course, Holly Gibney's debut into the King universe. So as a club, we're taking a look at her very bumpy beginnings and tracking the path until we get to 2023's standalone novel, the most recent King fiction release called Holly. I haven't read it yet, but I'm on the road to get there. And I must say, dear ones, I don't know if anybody has been keeping tags on my Holly thoughts throughout these past episodes, but I, today, would call myself somewhat neutral and very Switzerland on the whole opinion of Holly Gibney. I feel I've definitely been on the fence for most of the Holly love-hate over the years. I do like her. I do. Let's start with that. I think she's important. I'm happy she's in the spotlight. But I think it's a like, it's not necessarily a love. I hope I haven't said I don't think I have. But here's what I do love, guys. What I actually love is studying why King enjoys her so much and how she develops and grows and becomes generally more in each story. So I guess what I will confidently say in terms of my feelings toward this character is that I love the creative process of Holly Gibney. I love the analysis of Holly. We're really going to dive into this so much more, but let's recenter on the novel Mr. Mercedes to get us headed in that direction. I first read Mr. Mercedes around 2015-ish, pretty sure. It was the very early days in my King journey, but I acquired a hardback copy from my local library branch, which matches my reading copy, which is the 2014 Scribner hardback with the iridescent blue umbrella on the front. The cover is white and there is a rain shower of blood. It's great. But I have vivid memories of reading it on my couch and noticing how fast the book moved compared to the other King books I had read at that time, which, as you all know, wasn't very many because I only started reading Stephen King in the year 2013. So those first few titles were quite thrilling for me. I thought Mr. Mercedes was gritty, intense, and even though I would say I haven't read a ton of crime thrillers, but I really like them, and I do appreciate investigative narratives. I love a good police procedural. But this particular King title had all of that, right? We have an investigative crime thriller, but this one has a very icky edge that is rather soaked with the filth of Brady Hartsfield, and I thought it was super effective. On this second read-through, I think I still like it a lot. But friends, I think Mr. Mercedes is not a love for me, just like Holly Gibney is not a love for me. Boy, do I like them a lot. I like this book a lot. I do. We're going to unpack it. We're going to get into that later. But I really overall enjoyed the reread to observe some of the things I missed because the plot was really moving quickly. I mean, this thing's definitely a ride, my friends. It kind of reminds me a little bit, although Drawing of the Three is exponentially different and way more explosive. It's giving me the way I felt with Drawing of the Three a little bit, just non-stop. But yes, with this second read-through, I really enjoyed the revisit of how this story unfolds. And of course, I was all eyes on Holly Gibney's beginning, which was really cool to observe, knowing what I know now in terms of what a big deal she will be. I think all of us were in the same boat when we first read Mr. Mercedes. Nobody was paying that much attention to this quirky, manic, chain-smoking, weird girl who comes in at the last minute. But now that I know what I know, I was definitely hyper-focused, tunnel vision on Miss Holly Gibney, and I really enjoyed that experience. In this episode, we will take a look at what's working in this novel. Where is this crime story strong? But we're going to put a large emphasis on characters, as we have some really important and intriguing ones to discuss, because Holly Gibney isn't the only repeating character. Then, after taking a look at characters and strengths, we'll progress into our criticism and questions section, and we'll take a final look back, dig up any last remaining thoughts and or positive aspects of the novel that didn't get mentioned in other sections. And then we're going to hit the gas on this Mercedes S-Class and head on out. Now, for those of you precious fans and listeners of the show who have been hanging out with me for a year or two, you know I have other episodes on the 2017 TV Mr. Mercedes miniseries. It's on Peacock here in the States, unknown where it's streaming overseas. This series stars Brendan Gleeson as Bill Hodges, Harry Treadaway as Brady Hartsfield, who I know he was in Game of Thrones, I just don't remember. Or maybe he wasn't, and I'm just really screwing that up. But also the actress Justine Loop as Holly Gibney, and Miss Justine is also the audiobook narrator for the 2023 novel that is Holly. So if you kind of want to have some nerdy deep diving there, check out Justine Loop's performance as Holly Gibney, and then you get to hear it in the Holly Gibney audiobook. So I'm hoping my book club takes advantage of that so we can discuss it later. But I really loved the first season of the show. Second season, not too bad. And then the third season, I don't really have anything nice to say about that, dear ones, but I really like the casting overall. And I kind of appreciate the creative liberties they took with the script. So if you're interested or you're wondering how I felt about the Mr. Mercedes television series, you're more than welcome to jump back to those previous television coverage episodes. Apologies on the shoddy audio quality if you do. But because I've sprinkled in some thoughts on the Mr. Mercedes show throughout this podcast, today I will not be spending a lot of time on it, if any time at all, really, in this episode, because I would just be a little redundant, and we don't want that. I already have a problem with that already, buddy, so I gotta keep myself in line here. But yes, if you're interested, go ahead and hopscotch around. I have some thoughts scattered on the show, so check those out if you like. Bottom line, I love the casting, and I think they made some entertaining choices with the story. For those of you who haven't read Mr. Mercedes, or it's been a little while since you have, just a word of warning that I will talk about plot spoilers to an extent. I will be exploring this novel and its layers, and because this is a crime thriller, plot is everything. Plot points are huge parts of the story, so it's recommended that you have previously read the book before entering into this episode. I think you'll have more fun that way. However, if you like to live dangerously, then unbuckle that seatbelt and stay a while longer, and hopefully you still have a good time. Dearest loves, this is a 2014 release. My American hardcover is clocking it at 437 pages, broken up into 8 parts, entitled Number 1, Gray Mercedes. Number 2, Det Ret, which is DET, period, capital RET, which is an abbreviation for Detective Retired. Pretty sure. Hope I didn't screw that up. Number 3, Under Debbie's Umbrella. Number 4, Poison Bait. Number 5, Call for the Dead. Number 6, Kisses on the Midway. Number 7, The Proclamation. And number 8, Blue Mercedes. In between those 8 chunks, we have a novel that begins in the not-so-fun year of 2008. If you were living and working in the United States of America or owned a house in an American suburb, it was super gross and dicey, and no one, most likely, wants to reflect on that time. It sucked. But our main narrative begins in 2010 Ohio. So according to my textual notes, which of course could be wrong, there appears to be a 2-year gap from the original crime that takes place in 2008, the Mercedes murders, to where the hunt begins in 2010. This story is written in third-person omniscient with varying character point of view shifts, with the majority of focus placed on retired detective Bill Hodges and Oedipus complex psychopath Brady Hartsfield. Let us now shift into drive with a little bit of summary. Detective Bill Hodges sank into an unhappy and restless retirement with the unsolved city center massacre on his mind. When he is contacted by someone identifying as the Mercedes killer, Hodges can't help but investigate where the case left off and insert new data from this mysterious pen pal. Brady Hartsfield is a young tech loner who is a full-time retail worker and part-time ice cream man, and he wants to stretch those murder muscles further and take out the one cop who got the closest to discovering he was the conductor of the city center massacre. While Brady drops clues to draw Bill out once and for all, both men are led on dark and twisted paths that bring forth tragic and serendipitous consequences where more innocent lives hang in the balance. Alright, my sweet little gumdrops. I think that's the bulk of the housekeeping I wanted to put forth for this episode. Let us now get ourselves a tasty frozen treat and begin episode 129, the beginning of Miss Holly Gibney, book 1 of the Bill Hodges trilogy, Mr. Mercedes. Let's start the show. Alright, my little ice cream cones, welcome to the character section exploring 2014's Mr. Mercedes. Now, usually I begin with novel strengths, but I realized my character list is a little long. We got a lot of people to plug in with, and I thought we should get started there first. We're going to begin with our character section, transition to strengths, and then criticism and questions at the end per usual. But yes, let's get into it and talk about some characters. To kick off our heroes, villains, and honorable mentions exploration, I have one of our main protagonists, Mr. Kermit William Hodges, a retired detective aged 62. With the character of Bill Hodges, Steve definitely channels one of the most amazing tropes in fiction and in film, and that is the retired detective. Oh, it's so good, guys. There are so many tremendous novels television series, if you are somebody who adores British mystery thrillers like my father does, almost every single show has a retired detective who's a curmudgeon and sad and jaded and maybe struggling a little bit with drinking, or rather the opposite. They're so happy to have escaped that life. They're starting anew with the loved ones, whoever is around them, that they want to enjoy, and then they just have such a moral compass and such a good heart, they get pulled back into the fray, often reluctantly. But yes, I'm a huge BritBox fan. I mean, it makes sense that the Brits would do it the best, because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, after all, did give the world Sherlock. And then we also have, of course, Agatha Christie and countless others. When it comes to mysteries and thrillers and crime, it is my humble opinion that the UK is really chef's kiss perfection. I digress. Bill is really channeling that trope quite beautifully. Bill is effectively retired from his previous detective role. He seems to be struggling with it a little bit. In the beginning of the story, the reader observes that Bill is watching a lot of garbage daytime television and holding his pistol near his face, near his mouth. He has it right next to him. He's just kind of sitting there with his thoughts and with life, and this pistol is near him. So King doesn't feed too much into it, but there is definitely a little bit of depression there. Which makes sense when you had a role that was so full of purpose and meaning and people's actual lives depending on you, and then all of that goes away. It makes sense that one can spiral and find a lack of motivation and a sinking hole. And King has a very light touch on it because the pacing on this novel is so good. More on that later. So we don't stay there for too long, but that is how we first encounter Bill Hodges. The Mercedes massacre, as we come to learn, was unsolved before he entered retirement, and it's definitely been nagging at him. Nobody wants to leave with unfinished business, and so insert this really, really fun story that unravels because of it. Bill's pretty great, he's pretty old school, and what I love about this character is that by bringing this retired detective back into the flow, back into the chaos, a lot of positive things happen to Bill as well. And so we're going to talk about this later, but I do think there's maybe a hidden message there about getting out of your house, showing up, plugging into your community. More on that later. But Bill is, of course, 62 as our story is unfolding, which would have made him around 60 if my notes are correct, if my timeline is right in terms of when the city center massacre occurred. So that's Bill. We will return to him later in greater detail all over this episode. But the next character I want to mention, I hesitate to use the word love interest, but for lack of a better phrase, we'll call her the love interest, even though she is a very enjoyable, wealthy woman who gets what she wants. And what she wants just happened to be Bill. This is 44-year-old Janey Patterson Trelawney, also known as Janelle. She is the cousin to Holly Gibney and the daughter of Olivia Trelawney, who owned the Mercedes that was stolen and utilized in the city center massacre. Janey is going to inherit a lot of money. The women in her family are wealthy, and they're also very mentally unstable. She seems to be doing okay. This woman, from what we know of, is divorced, no children, and King gives her a lot of charm, a lot of independence that a woman in her 40s sort of gets. I know what I want and you're gonna give it to me kind of thing, in the best way. And what I really love about Janey, she is, of course, a romantic interest for the character of Bill Hodges. And they definitely don't waste any time. And that's because this lady doesn't want to waste any time. She knows that he's there and he's unattached, and so is she. And so why waste time? Let's live our lives. Let's go after it. And hey, I haven't been late in a while. Don't care if you have or not. Hey, let's just get this going. So rather progressive, very fun. When I first read the novel, of course, I wasn't really focusing a lot on Janey because there were way more stronger things happening that grabbed my attention. But this time around, now that I knew all the plot stuff, everything that would go down, I was able to focus on her. She's so enjoyable, friends. she's rather inspiring. If any lady is single in their 40s, just do what Janey did. Get what you want, babes. So I really enjoyed Janey's character. And I do think she brings a lot to the story. And sometimes it's kind of nice to observe what someone brings to the life of someone else. The character themselves might not be super strong. Not saying Janey's weak, but we just don't have as much character as we do other people. But what I enjoy is that Janey changes Bill. She gives Bill a lot of hope and happiness, a lot of unexpected joy. So when I think about Janey, I kind of think about what she brought to this other person, which is kind of nice. I kind of like what King did there. My third character, who I love, and I'm really thrilled that King decided to let this character echo along with Holly, Jerome Robinson. I love him so much. He is such a good guy. Jerome is 18 years old. He is about to head to an Ivy League school, and he mows the lawn for Bill. They are friends. Jerome is incredibly smart, and he is also a young black male, and I mention that because it is very integral to the story. There's a lot of head shaking. Yeah, I would say it's inappropriate. We're going to talk more about this in our criticism section, but there's a character who Jerome inhabits named Tyrone Feelgood Delite. Does anybody remember what that guy's all about? Yes, you do. So we're going to keep that in your mind. We're going to circle back and talk about it because I have thoughts, I have feelings. But Jerome, I love him. It was great to see him in this story because he is such a charmer, such a helper, a real sweetheart, especially when we see him interacting with his preteen sister Barbara. He's definitely a good big brother. He's just a good guy. But I know I shouldn't talk about Jerome in the other installments because it's not necessarily fair, but I love him so much. And the reason why I bring this up is because I love Mike Hanlon so much from the novel It, who's also a black male. But I can't be stopped, everybody. I have to bring up one of the reasons why I love Jerome so much. And this is from the 2020 novella collection, If It Bleeds. There's a really solid novella where Holly, Jerome, the whole gang is hunting down a bad guy. It's really good. But what was so great, and I've latched onto this since 2020, y'all. Like, since I read this, I cannot let it go. In the novella, Jerome, who's definitely a few years older now, definitely more of a man, no longer a teen, he's really sort of struggling with the philosophy of all of this hate and violence and terror and all of these sad things that happen. And he says, I think hate is a bird. And I think it flies into the mind of these dictators, these monsters, these tyrants, just flying around in their brain, and then it flies out into someone else. That's a really rough description of the beautiful way Jerome says it, but I'm like, oh my God, Jerome said it was a bird. And if you guys know from the novel It, Mike Hanlon, you guys remember, what was the entity Pennywise embodied to haunt Mike? Or rather, the bird has haunted the Hanlons, their descendants, the genetic line of the Hanlons for a very, very long time. We have some wonderful flashbacks of Mike observing his mother and him in a baby carriage, and there's this black crow in the carriage. It's so good, guys. So the fact that Jerome mentioned the bird being something that flies in, and we do have two African American characters connected by this very frightening animal symbol. I think about it all the time. I really do. I am obsessed. There's something there. There's gotta be. At least there is for me. And if it's just for me, that's okay. But if you're interested in more, go ahead and revisit 2020's If It Bleeds. Pay attention to what Jerome says about the bird. And for all of you It experts, is there a correlation? I think there just might be in my heart, but I love it so much. I love that the symbol of the bird, specifically the dark, scary black bird with its beady eyes, insert crow, raven, whatever you prefer, the entity of the bird being a source of torment for the Hanlons, and also a symbol that Jerome identifies with as being extremely negative and evil and sad. Huge, my guys. Absolutely huge. So I guess in my own heart, I'm trying to connect Jerome and Mike Hanlon, which I know I shouldn't do, but I am, just because that one thread really, really thrills me. But I am way off track, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive me. We absolutely drove off this road. Let's get back on it. Anyway, I love Jerome Robinson, and he's 18 in this story, and I'm really glad that King brings him along into other Holly installments because they're definitely good buddies. Of course, our next character is a very impressive villain. I like this guy as a villain. In the story, I want to kill him myself. Oh god, guys, the violence I have in my body for this individual it's not as bad as Big Jim Rennie, and I don't know why that is. Probably because Big Jim Rennie from Under the Dome had more influence than Brady does. Brady's just a little gross worm crawling around in the corners and in the shadows where no one can see him. He is quite despicable, but I do believe he's a very effective villain. According to my notes, Brady Hartsfield is in his late 20s. Unmarried, no children, thank God. He has a very unsettling and inappropriate relationship with his mother that incorporates actual sex acts. Whoa, guys, it's dark. Oh, it's dark. It works, though. More on that later. We got a lot of icky, yuck. My face is a real grimace when I think of Brady Hartsfield. He is very tech savvy. Definitely a loner. He's a complete imposter with people he works with, so he passes as being pleasant, being easy to get along with, but that is an absolute facade because underneath he is rotten. He is so gross, but he is calculating enough to pass as normal and kind and unassuming. He has 2 jobs as a retail worker, Discount Electronics, I believe it's called, and then he's also an ice cream man for the neighborhood. Everybody loves the ice cream man, which is a frightening concept in this novel. But Brady is cunning enough to hide in plain sight, which is an aspect of his character I really enjoy, because some people who are as mentally disturbed and there is so many things wrong with them, people are smart, as much as we have a lot to argue about that. In terms of animal instincts, in terms of connecting with that feeling of when someone makes you feel unsafe or someone gives you bad vibes or seems weird, that is your animal instinct telling you something is wrong, and that's usually dead on. There are several books written about it. Trusting your animal instincts or your gut instincts when you meet people, you can tell. You can tell if someone doesn't feel right. Obviously, if someone doesn't look right, there's that too. But this guy is seemingly just a wolf in sheep's clothing all over the town. And King really allows him to operate that way, because it is something that we are observing quite often with some of these violent fringe folk who are causing a lot of havoc in our modern day societies. But I believe at the time this story is being written, King is definitely giving us a 21st century villain. This guy doesn't have powers, wink wink, not yet, but he is someone who has the power of blending in, of utilizing technology, and via that technology, he is one step ahead. I don't know for sure, but I think King is kind of channeling the incel community for this villain that is Brady Hartsfield. Incel is, of course, internet speak and an abbreviation that stands for involuntary celibate. And this is, oh gosh, where to touch on this? Definitely feel free to do your own research on this group. I'm sure we're all aware they're very mainstream at this point, but I want to say over the last 10 years, it's definitely become more mainstream because sadly they're associated with terrible things. But what to know about involuntary celibates is they are a group of men who feel ostracized by society, specifically women. They feel they are entitled to women. They feel slighted, they are angry, and they usually tend to bleed into fringe groups. You know, your average Nazi party, other racist hate groups. They're prime pickings because they are wounded, sad, afraid, and overall entitled. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. even though I think the majority of us, we know who these guys are. We know what they're about. The internet trolls saying horrific, despicable things in these platforms. But what's interesting is Brady's motivation is kind of fascinating. I think he just wants to cause chaos for the sake of chaos, whereas a lot of the incel-related violence is wanting to avenge their own slighted lives. Brady isn't driven by revenge. He's kind of tunnel vision on making a mess and getting away with it, because he can. It's more of a power dynamic, I think. We're going to definitely break down Brady a lot more in our later sections, but he is our big bad, a very effective one at that, one that I like discussing with Kingfolk. Our fifth character is, of course, our Lady of the Hour, Miss Holly Gibney. Holly is 44 years old. Oh my goodness gracious, guys. I forget that. I do. And what was interesting, a lot of the folks in my book club felt that 44, it was difficult to connect. And so it's interesting that we do have her age, and then we do have her dialogue and her behavior. And so there's really something to break down when you realize that Holly is definitely very advanced in age, but she talks to her mother like a young teenager would. But when we first meet Holly, oh my goodness, guys, she is mumbling. Bill has no idea what she's saying because she's just frantically mumbling. She's chain smoking. She's rather awkward. She publicly declares out loud that she's on Lexapro, which is an anti-anxiety medication. She consistently says, I have mental problems, over and over. She really, really echoes that. She also articulates that she's very reclusive. She keeps lists of all the movies she watched. She loves lists. One of my favorites is that she says she has 56 pairs of earrings, which I love. I have like 5 times that, Holly. But I love these lovely little details of her being a fan of film. And she herself is also tech savvy, having taken a computer class while she was at home. But one of the things that really blew me away, folks, that was such a huge, oh my goodness, I didn't realize, there is a climactic moment involving Janey Patterson and an explosion. Holly ran towards the explosion. That made me immediately stop in my tracks, because that's something that's very big, as we will come to see. Holly also has a really huge and pivotal role in the climax of the novel. It's very action-packed, where we need a lot of tech, we need a lot of savvy decision-making, and Holly is at the forefront of that. So she really shines. She comes in about 200 pages into the story. She's rather clunky and awkward. We do get a little bit of a flashback as to what her childhood was like. She was bullied relentlessly. She was institutionalized, extremely depressed, and what we also get to observe with this first installment of Holly is that her mother, wow, her mother is an extremely dominating, suffocating presence, and you could tell that her proximity, her involvement in Holly's life causes her so much stress. Oh man, Holly is just quaking every hour of the day because she has no peace. There's no relaxation. There's just chaos in her body and mind because her mother is just shoveling it out. She can't escape. It's really sad. And so Holly's mother, which I know plays a larger part in 2023's Holly novel, yeah, it's a lot. And it's really prevalent in this story. So I loved seeing this, guys. It was great to see these early beginnings. As I mentioned, this family of Trelawneys, Gibneys, they're very nervous. They really struggle with reality, folks. It's said that Aunt Olivia Trelawney, who took her own life, this is the lady who had the Mercedes stolen. Brady used the Mercedes, you know what happened there. She had a very, very nervous stomach. She had to eat the most bland foods known to man. She couldn't have any spice. She couldn't have anything at all because her stomach was just hot mess express, probably riddled with ulcers because she just had a nervous condition. Hysteria! These hysterical women. And it's just so sad because the environments they were most likely raised in, or whatever marital situations they were plugged into, they just... oh, these poor things. You know, there's so many undiagnosed mental illnesses. Thankfully, Holly does have medicine, but it was really great to see the grandmother, Aunt Olivia Trelawney, Holly Gibney's mother, and Holly herself. So this was a very cool spotlight to spend some time in to see, oh yeah, okay, this gal has a lot of troubles, a lot of issues, and sadly her family seems to add to that rather than help it. But that's Miss Holly Gibney. We are, of course, going to talk more about her, a lot more about her coming up. But my one last character before we head out of here, gotta mention precious Odell the dog. This dog belongs to Jerome and Barbara Robinson, and he is an Irish setter, and he is such a good boy. That's all I wanted to say. I'm really, really happy that we have Odell the dog in this story, and I apologize for this spoiler, but for you animal lovers out there, I know it's accepted. Odell is okay. It's a big, big thing. Sometimes we just need that, don't we? So Odell is okay in this novel. I'm very happy about it. Let's recap the characters we explored for 2014's Mr. Mercedes. We have 62-year-old Mr. Kermit William Hodges, also known as Bill, the retired detective at the center of our story. Next, we have 44-year-old Janey Patterson Trelawney. After that, we have Jerome Robinson, almost out of high school, ready to go to college, but he might have a future in the detective world due to his savvy sleuthing skills. Next, we have our big bad, late 20s, wolf in sheep's clothing, Brady Hartsfield, who seems to want to cause chaos just because he can. Next, we have Miss Holly Gibney, 44-year-old cousin to Janey Patterson. She's on Lexapro. She is on the struggle bus, but coming around and enjoying her newfound friendships with Detective Bill Hodges and Jerome Robinson. Lastly, Odell the dog, Irish setter, totally sweet and cute. I almost mentioned Brady Hartsfield's mom, but we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about her a little later, because yeah, I got some thoughts. And with that said, everybody, I think I hear the ice cream man. I'm going to go have a look, and while I do that, I'll meet you in the next section. Okay, buddies, this is the strength section for Mr. Mercedes, and I have a few categories I want to break down with you all that really highlight and isolate why Mr. Mercedes is a fun one to analyze. I want to start things off with our first topic that is centered around the definition of hard-boiled. I'm sure when you think about it, for the most part, a lot of us have heard of the term hard-boiled crime thriller or hard-boiled detective novel, but what exactly does that mean? Traditional definitions have it birthing a fiction genre in the 1920s and 30s, when crime/noir fiction was very popular and centered around the mafia and prohibition and the corrupt side of the law. And so I'm guessing the hard-boiled term it's gotta be connected to an egg in hot water. Of course, I didn't exactly find proof of this, it's just my educated guess. When you throw an egg into hot water, what happens? Y'all know it becomes a hard-boiled egg. Yum, yum. The hot water being the crime, the mean streets, the tough stuff. When someone gets in, quote, hot water, you see what they're made of and whether they will sink or swim. Nowadays, in a more contemporary setting, hard-boiled fiction is defined in a few ways that have developed from the roots of the past. It is a literary genre that specifically indicates crime and investigation at their source. The detective in pursuit of the bad guy or justice as it can be observed in whatever world it's being described. But what's really interesting about hard-boiled crime fiction or noir fiction is that the city is often a dump. Sad to say, it's usually a trash hole. Think of my homeboy Bruce Wayne's stomping grounds. Not Wayne Manor, of course, but Gotham City, a real hell pit, really dangerous. And 99 times out of 100, our hero/detective at the heart of our story is often an anti-hero. Anti-heroes are amazing. I think a lot of us are in love with them because they perform heroic things for the reader or viewer, but they may not exactly be legal or wholesome or completely selfless. They're kind of good, but they're not exactly squeaky clean. For an anti-hero detective, Batman, the other love in my life, is a perfect example of this. Batman does the right thing. He lives by a code. He might have to break your face to stay in line with said code, but he's a very reluctant hero. He doesn't want to do it. He has to do it. And his personal life is very sad and void of love and affection and attention and real attachment. And it's all around very sad under that mask, but the job gets done. Today, hard-boiled crime features, typically but not always, a crappy, dangerous setting, an anti-hero detective, and a lot of sex and violence, y'all. And that all together in the soup bowl will give us a hard-boiled crime novel. Sketchy setting, sexy sex, all the blood, guts and gore, and a detective with secrets, addictions, reluctance, etc. That's our hard-boiled crime. I believe King decided to channel the hard-boiled crime genre with this story. I do think he's accomplished it, and it's one of the successes found within this novel, Mr. Mercedes. We do have a little bit of sex. It's fun and flirty and unexpected. Our very progressive romantic interest, Janey Patterson, is the dame who's a tall drink of water. We've got violence. Yes, we do. Whoa, wow, guys. The opening scene of this novel is absolutely blood-soaked. And then we also have a brutal exit of Brady's mother from the novel, as well as the character of Janey Patterson and the murder of Brady's younger brother, Frankie, who's just a little guy. Super yikes to both of the ladies, and then an almost bloodbath with the climax of our story. The violence is definitely plugged in, the body count is high. And one of my book club attendees, oh my goodness, bless her, she was a first-time King reader, you guys, and I just want to hug this gal. She's such a trooper. She powered through, but said it was extremely gritty for her. She wasn't sure she was going to finish it. And I could just tell by the look on her face, you guys, she did not really have a good time, but she stuck it out. I get it. If you are coming from the Candyland roads of romance or general fiction, this novel is a real dunk in the ice tank, my loves. Dang. In addition to the violence, this kind of goes on par with it, but we have some absolutely crass and filthy language, specifically from our heinously ugly villain, Brady Hartsfield. The N-word with a hard R is frequently dropped, in addition to other X-rated stuff about semen in the gutters, and I'm stopping. I was gonna say more, but I can't. It's too gross. Definitely eyebrow-raising, dark, edgy, and if one is not prepared, if one is not fully digesting the hard-boiled crime genre inclusions, some readers may definitely be clutching their pearls. Granted, I believe the constant readers, for the most part, we don't get too many feathers ruffled when it's really gnarly and gory. leave that to King's liberal politics to do that. But in our next section, we'll talk about some of the dialogue used in this story, but the hard-boiled nature of this story, the gritty, visceral, violent, offensive nature of Mr. Mercedes makes the foundation of this story very, very strong. In addition to really channeling the hard-boiled for this novel, King took a unique structure approach, and instead of creating a whodunit where the Mercedes killer is a big mystery until the final pages, which is what we have in traditional crime thrillers, it's all about figuring out who the person was, and you gotta wait until the damn end to get there. Well, King decided not to do that, and it's pretty great. In this installation, we have the cat, Bill Hodges, and the mouse, Brady Hartsfield, operating in the same space. The reader has that dramatic irony. We know what's happening. We know how far, far, far off track Bill and his team are, and we know what Brady is plotting, how it's being executed, and King brings the two sides together to really create some awesome suspense and an overall thrill ride. The readers, technically speaking, in the passenger seat, we're gonna really bleed this car metaphor to death because we can. But anyway, we are observing the bad guy and the good guy. The two plates are spinning at the same time, and it is a very exciting reading experience. We've got that hard-boiled strength backing this narrative, the ugly, sharp edges of this story, as well as the structure of how King positioned the chess pieces, the cop and the criminal. It's working really, really well. And I think it fits in nicely with the horror route King sometimes, most times, takes, but also marries the unfiltered Bachman tendencies that might be a little rusty-dusty, but they're still there in the back somewheres. And I think it all blends together in this 21st century thriller that definitely ticks all the right boxes. If you haven't read Bachman, personally speaking, I don't think you're missing much. However, highly recommended you make an exception for The Long Walk, as I know a lot of constant readers have that celebrated very highly on the list, and for good reason. It's an intense one. It's one to admire. It's one to celebrate and dissect for sure. But Bachman is definitely unfiltered King. King is an edgy writer. He is a masculine writer, and it's even worse in the Bachman persona. I haven't read all the Bachmans, but I've read a handful, and they're not my favorite. Mostly for the execution of the story, but also the narrative voice has that edge that makes me dislike really everything about it. I'm just not a fan personally. However, I haven't finished them all. I'm sure there's one that I might like. Well, what am I saying? I love Blaze. Blaze is a Bachman novel. Blaze is perfect. Never mind. There's not a lot of crassness in there. Blaze is the exception to the unfiltered Bachman edge, but some of the other ones have something that just isn't connecting quite right, but more on that later. Our second category in the strength section for Mr. Mercedes is dialogue and plot. Okay, friends, I think the reason why this story moves so quickly is because King is really focusing on these two literary elements. Firstly, we have dialogue absolutely everywhere, my good buddies. Oh my goodness, guys, if you have this text in front of you, this is a very, very dialogue-heavy piece, which I love. I'm such a fan of dialogue and what it can accomplish. And in conjunction with that, King is really focusing on plot, which is, some might argue, isn't exactly one of his strengths, even though he has strengths in every single area of fiction. But he has the most strength in character development, but King seems to pivot from that a little bit in this novel and really make plot the focal point. And boy, does that really get things moving, really lets the engine rev, pun intended. They're gonna be everywhere, my guys, so just embrace it. But I think this was a really smart choice to deviate, change up his style a little bit. It's very stylistically different from his usual depths that explore those characters to a greater degree. And when I think about it, even though I really love the plot and the dialogue, I think that might be the reason, well, one of the reasons why Mr. Mercedes is a strong like for me rather than a huge love. and that's because this is a plot and dialogue story, and while those are super fun and jaunty and exciting, there is not a lot of stuff for me personally, my personal readerly preferences, to connect with in terms of character. Our cat and mouse get the most character development out of anyone, and it's still pretty marginal. We learn that Bill is divorced with an adult daughter who we never hear from. It's all peripheral. He's out of shape, he's not handling retirement well, but the dangle of the carrot, solving the city center massacre, following the clues, all that waves in front of him, and in the process of following said carrot, he gets some younger tail to match the crassness of this book and forms strong bonds with a caring and rather savvy and efficient team that's comprised of Jerome and Holly, who end up stealing a bit of the spotlight, which I think is intentional. But that's kind of all we got. Granted, that is a lot, that is a good amount, but the depths certainly aren't as deep. Not a lot of younger Bill, no Bill before he was a cop, no time for that. We gotta stop this bad guy, we gotta hit the gas. Brady is the character who really gets the most amount of development that I'm used to, and I think that's why I enjoy him as a villain. We get these wonderful few chapters, which I will read a sample from soon, where we learn about his mom and his younger brother, and we get to see the early years of this frightening figure. But other than Brady's past, the character development is on a smaller scale, and it's okay. But I think the quickly moving plot and the dialogue is the real heart of this story. It's all talking, guys, every chapter. We have occasional forays into the subconscious of either Brady or Bill, but other than those brief sojourns, this is a talking book in which plot is zooming past us quick as they talk it out. The mystery demands to be solved. The cat and mouse must meet in the middle for their battle. It's really, really cool. Okay, sweet ones, before we head out of this section, of course we have to celebrate the text and isolate some lovely writing. So I wanted to share one of the rare prose segments that comes in around 3/4 of the way through. This is after the death of Brady's mother, and King sort of slows down the action and the dialogue so the reader can see the origins of this monster. And I really love all the details here, guys. This is a segment that I will most likely share with my classes because I think it really instructs that info dumps aren't necessarily bad. Sometimes with teaching fiction, specifically in their fiction drafts and workshop, we always try to isolate info dumps and figure out a way we can do those better. But sometimes an info dump is kind of necessary, and in this scenario, it works. So this is an example I'm definitely ready to share with one of my workshop classes, but you guys get first dibs. This example begins in the American hardcover on page 244. Deborah Ann Hartsfield was one of those rare ex-cheerleaders who, even after bearing children, managed to hang on to the body that had danced and pranced its way along the sidelines under the Friday night lights. Tall, full-figured, honey-haired. During the early years of her marriage, she took no more than a glass of wine with dinner. Why drink to excess when life was good sober? She had her husband, she had her house on the north side of the city, not exactly a palace, but what starter home was, and she had her 2 boys. At the time his mother became a widow, Brady was 8 and Frankie was 3. Frankie was a plain child and a bit on the slow side. Brady, on the other hand, had good looks and quick wits. Also, what a charmer! She doted on him, and Brady felt the same about her. They spent long Saturday afternoons cuddled together on the couch under a blanket, watching old movies and drinking hot chocolate, while Norm puttered in the garage and Frankie crawled around on the carpet playing with blocks or a little fire truck that he liked so well he had given it a name, Sammy. Norm Hartsfield was a lineman for Central States Power. He made a good salary pole climbing, but he had his sights trained on bigger things. Perhaps it was those things he was eyeing instead of watching what he was doing that day beside Route 51, or maybe he just lost his balance a little and reached the wrong way in an effort to steady himself. No matter what the reason, the result was lethal. His partner was just reporting that they'd found the outage and repair was almost complete when he heard a crackling sound. That was 20,000 volts of coal-fired CSP electricity pouring into Norm Hartsfield's body. The partner looked up just in time to see Norm tumble out of the cherry picker basket and plunge 40 feet to the ground with his left hand melted and the sleeve of his uniform shirt on fire. Addicted to credit cards like most middle Americans as the end of the century approached, the Hartsfields had savings of less than $2,000. That was pretty thin, but there was a good insurance policy, and CSP kicked in an additional $70,000, trading it for Deborah Ann's signature on a paper absolving the company of all blame in the matter of Norman Hartsfield's death. To Deborah Ann, that seemed like a huge bucket full of cash. She paid off the mortgage on the house and bought a new car. Never did it occur to her that some buckets fill but once. She had been hardworking as a hairdresser when she met Norm, and went back to that trade after his death. 6 months or so into her widowhood, she began seeing a man she had met one day at the bank. Only a junior executive, she told Brady, but he had what she called prospects. She brought him home. He ruffled Brady's hair and called him Champ. He ruffled Frankie's hair and called him Little Champ. Brady didn't like him. He had big teeth like a vampire in a scary movie, but he didn't show his dislike. He had already learned to wear a happy face and keep his feelings to himself. One night, before taking Deborah Ann out to dinner, the boyfriend told Brady, "Your mother's a charmer, and so are you." Brady smiled and said thank you and hoped the boyfriend would get in a car accident and die. As long as his mother wasn't with him, that was. The boyfriend with the scary teeth had no right to take his father's place. That was Brady's job. Such a fan of that segment, my friends. It is one of the only areas where we have a solid character backstory, and it's really great. It's visual, tremendous details, good depths, and I love it because it does allow the reader to get a greater sense of how a monster is made. And from this early portion, we can kind of tell that Brady might be one of those villains that's potentially born bad. If there is such a thing, we don't know. That's something I will definitely tackle in our next section. But before we head that way, let's have a brief recap of our strengths. Our first strength is, of course, examining the hard-boiled genre. And our second category was dialogue and plot. I really, really love all three of those elements sandwiched together. It's definitely making a nice Neapolitan sandwich. Oh my goodness, ice cream sandwiches. Might be time for lunch. All right, ladies and dudes, let's get this big boy up to 65 and hit cruise control. I'll see you in our next section. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is our last section. This is the criticism and question zone for 2014's Mr. Mercedes. Okay, this is going to be tricky because I'm having a hard time articulating / wrapping my brain around how I want this to work. Basically, I think I've been thinking / overthinking it, and it's kind of a jumbled mess. So to borrow a phrase from my friend Matt Hurt from Tower Junkies, this might be a little bit of a word salad, but I'm just going to try and get it out because I do have a critique for the novel. There are things I don't like, and I feel we really only have one category in this section, and that is the lack of character. The lack of character will be our foundation, and I know I've mentioned this a few times throughout the episode thus far, but I really feel that's the root of the problem. For the other things I'm a little upset about, the root is our characterization is not as robust as I would like. Therefore, I think that's why I have problems with the other things I'm going to talk about. So as we move forward, I want you guys to keep that in mind, the lack of character. Now, I have two subtopics that are definitely something we should talk about. In my book club, The patrons were very off-put by two zones explored in this story. The first is the blatant, hateful, racist speech by Brady Hartsfield. This guy, yes, he is our villain, he is despicable, but he is really dropping the N-word all over the place. This is an incredibly offensive word, as we all know, and it's just become more incendiary with each passing decade, as it should. It deserves to be as such. And then the next is this persona, Tyrone Feelgood Delite, that the character of Jerome embodies to, I'm assuming, be a kind of comedic joke between he and Bill, but he speaks in the patois of former enslaved peoples, and it's kind of confusing, but it's very offensive, it's very inappropriate, and I don't know why it's there. Before I unpack those, I have to be very clear that this is not me wanting to censor King. I am not somebody who gets their feathers ruffled by dark, offensive content. Yeah, personally, I'm affected by it, but it will not drive me with a desire to censor it. As an educator of fiction, oh, boys and girls, the things I have read, it would curl your hair. And I always tell my students when we're about to start fiction drafts, write whatever you want. However, if you are going to go into that darker territory, just know that as the head of this classroom, I am legally obligated to intervene if there is concrete evidence for potential suicide or bodily harm of another animal or child. And so that's my caveat to all my students before we begin writing. I'm all about putting forth whatever your creative vision is. If it's dark, if it's violent, if it's sexually explicit, okay? Just understand your reading audience might not be as responsive as you like to that kind of content, and the instructor is legally obligated to intervene if it goes too far. So I often encourage students to keep the super darkest X-rated stuff in the back of the drawer. Keep that for your friends or another writers group off campus so you don't have to deal with classroom protocols. It usually works. And even with that warning to the class, I still get some very dark material, and the whole lesson of workshop is to learn to grade objectively. So I'm not here to censor King, and I'm not here with a wish to omit the content. I'm mostly speculating on how these dark areas, these inappropriate branches of the characters, it's offensive without any root to that offensiveness. For example, why is the character of Jerome doing this? He's an 18-year-old kid. Did he recently read Huckleberry Finn? Did he come from theater camp? Why is he doing this? What is the joke between he and Bill? It's never really described to the reader, so this strange, offensive patois is just floating between the two of them, and it's uncomfortable for the reader. It was confusing for the readers in my book club. And there's just a kind of head-shaking frustration with why it's there if there's no connection to the character of Jerome. Why does he do this? Is he someone who gets really nervous speaking directly with people and he has some sort of a tic? I don't know. Why is it necessary? Why are we doing that? It is offensive content. It is racist content. It's highly unnecessary because it's disconnected from the character of Jerome. If you wanted to keep it in there, okay, but in order to strengthen that, explain to me why the character of Jerome would speak that way. I want to know. In the same vein, this is why I have a problem with Brady's overtly racist hate speech. We don't really have direct indication as to why he uses language like that. Technically speaking, do we need to? No. Racists are all over the place. We don't exactly need a reason, but in a novel where we are focusing on characters, the assumption is that someone taught them this. Racism is learned, usually from a parent or friend group. And we do get the smallest, less than one sentence indicator that Deborah Ann Hartsfield was the one who spread this throughout the home. in the chapter I read a sample from in our previous section, if you kept reading post the father's death, Deborah Ann says how horrified she is that they would have to move south of where they're at, where there are a lot of insert N-word. Deborah Ann said that, so you're like, okay, got it. You obviously spread this throughout the home. But for someone as sociopathic and strangely disconnected from human empathy, I don't know. I'm just wrestling with why the overt, hateful, racist language is needed in 2014. I get that King wants us to dislike Brady, and usually when the N-word is dropped or we have racist, hateful speech, wow, we hate that character immediately. Yep, done, irredeemable, we want you dead, the reader hates him. I get that, I understand, but he already murdered 8 people in the city center massacre. He already wants to kill the dog of Barbara and Jerome. He is a bad person without the racist language, so I feel like maybe King is just putting too many ingredients in the stew pot, while simultaneously we don't have enough to make it work. It's so strange, everyone, and that's why I'm having such a difficult time articulating my thoughts in this section. Brady's racist language is offensive, uncomfortable, inappropriate. It's supposed to be. But I wonder, like I mentioned, I don't want to censor it. I'm not here to censor it. But can I have greater content as to why he feels such hatred for this group of people? I mean, he seems to be someone who hates all people of all ages. Why does it necessarily have to be Black people? There's just not enough development there. Why was Deborah Ann racist? Where was the seed of the hate? I need to know that. Because not that the reader will justify it, but at least we know, okay, these people weren't born bad. It was taught to them, like it's taught to all of us. So the lack of character development, I feel, is the root of all these problems, dear ones. If we had a greater backstory on Brady's upbringing in terms of why his mom was racist, what made him so racist, why the consistent and persistent use of the N-word is necessary in his vocabulary, it would help to know. It would help to understand this enemy of the story to a greater degree. And the same thing with Jerome. Why does Jerome feel so comfortable doing that? Why does he like to make people uncomfortable? Or rather, why does he think this is funny when it's very offensive to the general public? What is it that's comical about this? Where is this in Jerome's character? I don't get it. So it feels kind of gratuitous. This is unnecessary. We don't need this. And the fact that it's there, okay, let's look at it. It's in the novel. We can't take it out. King put it there. Now how do we justify it? Well, we need more character development, and that's what we don't have. We don't have that character meet, give us details as to what is it about Jerome? Why would he do that? Why would he speak that way? Why does Brady speak that way? Yes, he's a murderer. Yes, he's disgusting, but there's a lot of other things. So that's how I'm dealing with the really offensive content. A lot of the folks in book club, many of them newer King readers, were okay with, well, not okay, they were more tolerant to Brady's hateful speech because, of course, he's a despicable person. It's par for the course. But they were the most uncomfortable with Jerome as Tyrone Feelgood Delite, and I get it. That was the most uncomfortable and the most confusing. Why are we doing that in 2014? And okay, if we are doing it, why? Explain why. Why? And that's what I'm having the hardest time with, guys. We have this very offensive content in this novel, and there's kind of this blank white space as to what it's attached to. And that disconnect is what I'm having a problem with. Once more, it's fine that it's in the novel. I mean, morally, subjectively, I hate it. I think it's gross because I don't feel it's necessary. We already hate Brady. If you wanted to use it once or twice, okay, but it's very persistent. And the same with Jerome. If you wanted one sort of jokey moment between he and Bill, okay, Tyrone Feelgood Delite can come out for one paragraph. But again, the persistence is what makes it intolerable. It's what makes the content very uncomfortable. I'm okay with it being in there, but we need additional character details to rectify it, to cement it in place. Because right now it seems rather unnecessary and very gratuitous. And yes, the hard-boiled crime genre is all of those things. So technically speaking, maybe King is just under the hard-boiled umbrella, pun intended, and he just feels carte blanche to say what he wants, do what he wants. I think King does that in general. I mean, if I had $500 million, I certainly wouldn't care what people think, but for the integrity of the story, which I do believe King cares about, I know he cares about the craft, it seems a misguided move, or rather like a missing step. Oh, buddy, you missed this. This is an integral part of the story, and you missed it. Therefore, it's not about you being a rebel badass, it's about you and your art being cohesive and digestible. And right now, it's a little confusing. I read some pretty intense stuff in my day-to-day classrooms, so it's not like I'm shocked, because I'm not, but I'm confused. So I think that's where we'll stay with this, guys. The one category we have for this section is the lack of character development, and it has impacted my digestion of Brady, as well as my digestion of Jerome Robinson. But yeah, so it's kind of a hot topic in this story. I would really love to know what you guys think, because Mr. Mercedes is a darker one. Lots of sharp edges, and this offensive content, it's fine that it's there. It is. If this is King's creative vision, okay. But these potholes really make it hard for me to work with. So yeah, that's my one critique for Mr. Mercedes. With that, I think we're ready to speed on out of here into the sunset. I want to thank everybody for listening and for being so kind with your reviews and writing to the show at underratedsk@gmail.com. I had a lovely listener from Spain. I believe they're called Palabras Sonoras, I think, but I wanted to dust off my Spanish really quickly to thank this listener. Muchísimas gracias para escuchar este programa. Perdóname, mi español es 80%. La mayoría es mierda, pero muchísimas gracias para tus pensamientos para ese programa. Espero que te gusten más episodios en el futuro. Okay, that's enough of that. I'm sure I butchered it. Please forgive me. Thank you guys for the reviews you have left, and if you haven't left one, let's do that, my loves. It really, really puts some logs on the fire for me. It allows us to meet more King fans across the globe, so that would be a tremendous help if you haven't done that already. If you're not really the writing type, that's okay. Just go ahead and give us a quick rating of a 5-star or whatever you feel the show is meeting for you. I would love it if you would share it with a friend, the Stephen King fan in your life. And if you haven't followed us on Twitter, now X, Threads, Instagram, go ahead and do that. And I am always answering, so if you want to reach out and say hello or give your recommendations, correct me on anything, please do so. I am all ears. I'm happy to chat with all of you and learn about your love of King. In our next episode after this one, I believe we're going to have a really stellar constant reader interview with a horror fiction author who is absolutely a cheeky charmer. I love this guy to pieces, so that will be coming soon. And then, what's even more soon, around the corner in April, is going to be the release of Kim C's Patreon. Yep, it's finally happening, dear ones. It's been a long road, but it's going to happen. Coming next month, The Danse Macabre with Kim C will be live, and you can subscribe to the Patreon for absolutely exclusive content, lovies. That means Everything that's on the Patreon will not be featured here on the Year of Underrated Stephen King. So if you are a Patreon member, it's all exclusive. You get stuff that will never be heard by others. So it's going to be a very VIP club with just us. And I'm going to take a more relaxed approach. It's not going to be so much Kim C in the class. It will be Kim C after class heading to the bar to have a chat with a glass of wine with all of you. Should be fun, should be magical. Stay tuned. I will have more details in the next few weeks. But until then, thank you guys once more for listening to the show. Remember, we are in all the places, including YouTube. Take care wherever you are. I'll be in touch very soon.